That's how you start our Anchored and Devoted
No, you're
episode?
starting.
Good day and greetings from the peaceful and serene place in my head. I mean, I don't know where else it is. Gong. Welcome to our foolishness. This is Anchored and Devoted. I'm Pastor Joseph, and that other dude you heard is my brother, who I love dearly, Pastor Jeremy. And
hey guys.
today we're talking about a fun topic. I hope it stays fun and light and not dark or weird. Again, I have no clue, so you'll have to listen in on where we go with this. But we're talking about church again, and not the building, but the people.
Mhm.
And we're talking about relationship as well, relationship with God, relationship with others.
Mhm.
We're talking about the gifts that come with the Spirit, as well as the skills that God has given you and what that looks like in worship. We're talking about art today.
Mhm.
We're talking, at least I hope that's what we talk about. I have no clue where we go, but
Yeah, we'll find out. To be honest,
later.
it's not like this cart's under control.
But we were before we hit record, we were trying to figure out what to talk about today, and we have things listed. But we wanted to pull something off the list, and Jeremy said, let's talk about art when it comes to worshiping God. And I, instantly thought music.
Mhm.
I thought about the flag waving on Sunday service, because you have in certain churches dance ministries, and it's very artistic and beautiful. And then
And also weird.
well, it depends on the church. It depends
That's
on
true.
the church. The church we came out of, they had a dance ministry that really sought to minister to people. It wasn't in some. Oh, here we go with the bashing already. In some
No. What I mean by weird is it's odd, and I think it's mostly a cultural critique, because dancing is not something that, as a culture, we do. And there are cultures that still dance.
I'm about to say that's different.
Yeah. No, there are cultures that still dancing is still a big part of the culture. As an American culture, dancing is not that there's an American culture. I can make big asterisk right there. There's not an
Thank
American
you.
culture.
I was about to say, wait a minute. In the African American church, dancing is pretty much a norm.
Absolutely.
It is one of those things where
As an African American culture.
Exactly. I would say, but I would say that it is something that the church is moving away from, which is sad to me.
I would agree, but that's why it's weird. That's why when you see a dance ministry, and in the churches I grew up in, it was like a 45-year-old single woman.
Oh no.
And it was like,
what does her singleness have to do with
I
her
don't
dancing?
understand. I don't know why, but that's apparently what was in the application. It was like, are you married? Then you can't do this. I don't know.
No.
But that's, like I said,
Was there a single man in that ministry? No.
Only a married man, which doesn't make it any better.
This is your church, not mine.
I'm going to stop. I
will say I have an uncle who is, I'm in my 40s. I have an uncle, so he's significantly older than me, who is at a church in the Carolinas, and I will not embarrass him by putting his name out there, Uncle Charlie. Who?
That's a pseudonym. You see that? You see the name.
Who? I remember he shared. I didn't see it. He shared how at his church him and his wife wanted to start a dance ministry, and they brought in umbrellas and started dancing in the service. Now, my
but like Fred Astaire or Dick Van Dyke? That's awesome.
Like Fred Astaire. They started just doing their own thing. And they are both they're both filled with the Spirit. And they do have rhythm, but I don't see dancing as being a skill or a gift that God has graced them with. And so I'm sure the people that were there were gifted with much laughter and much
umbrellas.
Umbrellas. Like, he did it. Like, he brought umbrellas in. He was
not a cane,
well, and see,
an umbrella, not a broom.
I've seen a women's dance ministry where it was actually part of a wedding ceremony where they had white parasols and it was beautiful. This is not what I'm talking about. This is a very healthy air quote aunt and uncle, and they were again just having fun.
God bless them.
They did it to glorify God. It's a very small church. It's a fun church. It's a freeing church where they can.
I'm seeing the dance from White Christmas. The sisters dance. That's what I'm seeing.
they enjoy themselves thoroughly. So there's a wide range when we talk about artistry. When I think of a dance ministry, and this isn't what we're talking about today, which is funny. When I think of a dance ministry, I think what my wife was involved with, and they practiced 2 or 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
It was very professional, and it only occurred 2 or 3 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't a ministry which we're going to talk about, or this wasn't them dancing in worship at any time, just sporadically.
Mm-hmm.
This was a part of the worship service. What we're talking about today, because this is what you brought up,
mm-hmm.
is people bringing art. You gave the example, which I hadn't thought of, the example of someone setting up an easel at the back of church and painting. And I started laughing because I was like, hadn't thought of that one. Hadn't come across my radar at all. I've been in much church and that's never happened. Never even thought about it as happening. But I could imagine some individuals at my current church doing that. I could see it. And I could see the concern that would take place. Our church is large enough, though, that if they popped up, I don't think it would be a problem. We just push them into a corner so they didn't run a fire hazard kind of thing. But that's not the norm for most churches either. So the big question is, how does art work in church with people?
Mm-hmm.
Not really the building, but the people. So this isn't putting paintings on walls or whatever, because we're all for that. Like, that's not the issue.
And I want to be clear. I'm talking specifically about within the corporate gathering of God's people.
Yep.
The corporate meeting. Okay, and this makes a big change for me when I think about this. There's a huge distinction with the way that I'm going to think about art as personally expressive versus the way I'm going to think about a corporate worship. Am I being individually expressive in corporate worship? Yes, I am. Absolutely. Is the purpose to be individually expressive in corporate worship? This is where we have to have a conversation, right? I mean, it's called corporate worship, worshiping together. Having a group of, I mean, we've all seen the little kids play soccer, right? It's not a team sport. It's an individual sport that happen to be all wearing
the same uniform. That's right.
One set of 2 jerseys. Ball. That's right. Like, I don't even know whose team is who. They're all just running after the ball. It's a flock. It's fun because they're
stealing from one another. Mm-hmm. They don't understand what it means to be a team player, or to work together.
They do understand what it means to pursue an individual desire, expectation, goal, whatever. And that's where I think about this. The question I had asked you, which also plays into this, is in corporate worship, is it appropriate to have a guitar solo or a sax solo in the middle of your worship song? And I'm not talking about special music. I'm talking about in the middle of, Our God is an Army or something. I just made up that name. It's probably a Christian song somewhere, but I don't know.
That's a Christian song.
If it's not, we'll be soon. Our God is an Army. What a horrible name for a song.
I'm sure you can Google it. Someone's done it on YouTube. I'm sure it's there.
Yeah. So that's how I'm thinking about this. So what are your thoughts?
Okay. Is it okay to have yourself be the center of attention at church? No.
Okay.
I know that's pretty crude, but it is what we're getting at. Um,
Why is it not okay?
the worship service is for worshiping God, not for worshiping self.
For who to worship
Um,
God? Because I'm worshiping God.
you look at the Old Testament; it's pretty clear.
Yeah,
It's
but
God. It's
but
God. It's
but
all God.
I understand. But for who to be worshiping God? Because when I do this, I'm worshiping God.
No, you can do your riff at home. You can do your solo at home. Put your headphones on, get your worship on. Um, I get that. Um, when um, okay, I've been in churches where there are solos for the drummer, for the guitarist, for the
Hmm.
trumpeter, for all this kind of stuff. And although it is nice to hear, um, it doesn't cause me to glorify God in that moment. It causes me to enjoy that artist in the moment, which is actually a distraction from why I'm here. It's as if I have too much salt in my food.
Okay.
Like it's not enhancing any longer. At least for me, it's pulling me away. I love good music. I love listening to good music. Um, so that isn't the issue as far as it being good or bad. It's more, what is the purpose of the time that we're together?
Okay.
The time that we're together. Now, if you want to do a second service where the service is one is for worship, and then another service is um, for community coming together before God, that's different, right? That isn't a worship service where community comes together. We're looking to encourage one another, and we've talked about this a little bit in the music from church to church. Like there is worship music which glorifies God versus other music which is there to encourage you in your relationship with God. Um, I really believe that when you start to get into the solos and whatnot, we're leaning back into that encouraging the relationship with God as opposed to glorifying Him. Um, I do believe that,
Can we camp out there? Because I
yeah.
disagree with that.
Oh, well, I'm about to say, hold on a sec. But
Mhm.
yes, you can disagree. I do believe that if like we have agreed in the music, like it's written by you or someone else, that this is a part of how we all do this.
Mhm.
That's one thing. Um, but I do believe that culturally that isn't what takes place.
Okay. I agree. I agree with that.
So go for it. You disagree
Okay.
with what?
Um, I disagree that it's necessarily the case that
Mhm.
when a solo takes place, it removes the focus from God and puts it onto the individual. I think it certainly can,
Mhm.
but I don't think it necessarily does. And I think that it is very much based in our understanding as a culture and our teaching as a culture
Mhm.
on um, what worship is and what
Mhm.
service is.
Mhm.
What I am engaging with, what I recognize as worship as an individual, and how we as a group engage in worshiping God. And I think just to put the horse before the cart here, I think that a solo like this,
Mhm.
when done well by one who is very skilled, does glorify God in the same way that when God was giving David the directions for building the temple, he said, "You go get these people because they are the best, and you have them do the work this way, because this is one of the ways in which I am going to be glorified, because they are the best, and they're going to make this the most beautiful in their way." Now,
Okay.
since the time of the Old Testament,
Mhm.
and specifically since the time of the Reformation, the Protestant church has had sort of a visceral response to um, the presence of aesthetics in worship. We went from the Roman Catholic Church and these very big buildings with ornate architecture, ornate decorations, costly trappings of gold and all this, the stained glass, the art. And we rejected that as a Protestant rejection of everything Catholic and said, no, that is not what's central in worship. What's central in worship is the proclamation of Scripture and the worshiping of God. And I think that we went overboard there, not with the proclamation of the word. Well, let me take it back. I think we went overboard there, period. Both with the proclamation of the word as what is necessarily the focus of the corporate worship, as well as the refutation of the aesthetics. When we look back at the Old Testament, the way that God calls his people to worship him and to glorify him, we see both the working of the hands and craftsmanship. We see it in the presence of the worship service. And then we see multiple times where God's commanding people to come together for feasts and for holy gatherings. And one of the things that's constantly present is not just music, but music and singing by those who are most skilled. And we can say that there's a corporate nature to that, but there's clearly also a separate nature to that. And I think that one of the things that's happening there that we've lost because of the way that we have rejected the place of art in God's creation. One of the things that we've lost is the reality that when I ask an individual whom God has gifted, take my skill, which I have worked to hone, and then offer it back to God in front of you, as my worship to God to demonstrate my love to him, my commitment. What I'm doing is I'm displaying his handiwork in front of you such that you can look and say, not, wow, what a great guitarist, but wow, what a great God.
See, I
that
think
he's created this.
You hit upon my main question.
Took a long time for me to get to that last point, but that was it.
My main question is, who gets the glory?
I agree.
Right.
And I think that is.
I have no problem with. I really genuinely have no problem with a concert that is worship. Like, that doesn't bother me. Like, that's not an issue. Can you worship at a concert? Yes, I think you can. Like, it really has to do with who is getting the glory. If I'm looking for applause to give to the person as opposed to my creator, then I have an issue, right? Like, that's my issue when it comes to worship. I can have a good Christian concert where I am bolstered and enjoy it. And in it, I didn't say thank you to God once. I never really thought about him. I felt good because it was Christian, but it didn't glorify God. I did not worship. I enjoyed the fellowship with others as we celebrated our Savior, but I didn't glorify him. I didn't lift him up. I wasn't in the fullness of relationship with him. I was more focused on self and my feelings in that moment, or the presentation of the other person. I got lost in it, and again, didn't see God.
Like, I see that. I think of that as being the immature position, not the mature position. I look at that the same way that I look at, a person who says, hey, I'm all about fitness, so I don't do these dumb kid play videos because it's just play. It's not really exercise. And I say, no, you've missed the fundamental thing here. The fundamental thing in exercise is the exercise. So if the kids' video is having them get up and wiggle around and move so that they're using their gross body function and their large muscle groups, and that's the purpose for which this video was put together and published, and you're saying it's not exercise because it doesn't fit a concept of exercise that you have of whatever it might be, going to the gym or doing a running or whatever, getting your heart rate up to a certain point for certain, whatever that is. it doesn't meet your criteria, I think the problem is that you have the wrong criteria in mind because you haven't taken your desire for the good thing and
Mhm.
fully explored what it is. And I think that's a culturally based and a teaching based reality that sets in because we categorize things, and if we categorize something incorrectly within
Mhm.
our cultural context, then we're going to view it as not belonging. And I'm saying fundamentally, the Reformation did a bad thing when it comes to how we view art and worship. They became separated such that we,
Mhm.
I think, have not been able to. We have excised something from worship
Mhm.
that belongs within worship, and because of that, we've treated it both as more profound than we ought to, and we have treated it as less profound than we ought to. More profound in that it's all about the glorification of the individual, which means it really is all about the expression of the individual, which it's not. Art, as any creation, is about demonstrating God's glory. And we've also given it less.
But that really isn't taught culturally. Like that that is not what's
When you
presented.
separate out art from worship, you have to do that's what you have to do. You have to go to this is all about individual expression,
I'm not
therefore it has no place in
I'm
worship.
not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that is not what's shared even in church. Like that's not what's shared.
Yeah,
Um
I agree. And I think that's the problem. And I think it doesn't come from a good, mature understanding of scripture. It comes from a response to wrong things that were being done in the Roman Catholic Church that were rejected during the Reformation. That for the most part, the Protestant church hasn't taken the time to sit and think through well.
I would agree with you on the we haven't taken the time to sit through it well. I'd also agree that culture has become so consumer centric that I don't know um, how individuals, how sheeple
Hmm.
are able to engage with the discomfort or the messiness of things not being perfect.
Well, that I think is a valid point. And I don't have an easy answer to that, but I will say that when we take this out of the worship context
Mhm.
and look at it in a different worship or take it out of the worship of God context and put it in the worship of man context,
Mhm.
we can see some patterns. Think of whoever it is that you think of when you think of a good band, whatever that group is.
Mhm.
There's more than likely a or a few individuals in that band who stand out as the best musicians, whose solos are going to be memorable and stand out. And when you go and see them in concert, they're the ones who are going to have the solos. Their solos are going to be amazing. People are going to say, wow, that person is such a great musician. Listen to this solo. Rarely, in the minds of the people who are listening, does the greatness of that solo or the greatness of that musician take away from the greatness of the band. Unless there's like a great disparity between the skill,
Mhm.
what it does is it enhances the value of the band in the minds and in the hearts of the quote unquote consumers who, to follow this out, are the worshipers. In other words, I think that we already see there is a model that exists where we can say the goodness of the one enhances the glory of the true,
Yeah,
of
see,
what is really behind it.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I do think that that's almost a change in the conversation when you're talking about
I
having
completely agree.
better worship leaders or better whatever because they know that they'll be given solos. Like that's that's a different expectation as opposed to coming with a heart um to engage.
Well, see, when again, when God gives the instructions to David for Solomon, whether it's about the builders or the musicians, what he doesn't say is, you know what? If that person has a gift with a hammer or with the lyre, let them come and give that gift and pour it out here before the Lord because the Lord accepts all this. He doesn't. He doesn't say that. He says, get that person. They're the best. Get that person. They're the best. We have shied away from that kind of expectation in our move to the raising up of the individual, and B, the graciousness of the cross, that Christ accepts all of us. So he accepts my offering as little as it is. And I'm not naysaying that at all. He does accept it.
And see, I guess this is where I disagree culturally. I know in most African American churches, the singers are off the meter. And they're raised up in house though. They aren't brought in. Um, he will bring in specialists depending on the size of the church. The large churches will bring in,
Sure.
Different worshipers to come in and sing with the knowledge they're not coming to stay. They're doing an event. But there is the intentionality of grooming those that have been gifted to really shine in that space. And so now that you mentioned it, solos are given, whether it be at Christmas or different seasons where, the choir backs them up or whatever. But it isn't one. It isn't lost on anyone that the service is one to glorify God. Like everyone understands that.
And I'm going to venture out here and say, nor is it lost that sometimes these people who get the solos get big heads and start thinking it is about them,
I agree.
not about God.
I know that is true because I've seen that where people are upset and then leave and think that the world will stop because they're leaving, and then they realize no, the church didn't stop or even skip a beat. Like I know that to be true, whether it be musicians that play the piano or other instruments or those that are gifted with a vocal instrument.
So yeah, I've listened to in my culture of the white church, white Protestant non-denominational. One of the arguments used when talking about this to say we shouldn't do this is because it leads to pride. And I brought that up because I want to absolutely recognize that, yeah, it does give a place for pride to get in. And you also gives a place for pride to get in. Being born of woman, getting a job, learning a language, learning how to ride a bike, all this gives room for pride. And they're not bad because they give room or a place where pride might grow. Pride is a problem. Pride needs to be addressed. We cannot worship in pride. However, the fact that someone can fall into the sin of pride because we have accepted God's pattern and said, no, the best should be giving their best in the midst of the corporate because that's how God receives the best from all of you. I think that's one of those places where God has said, hey, stay 5 feet away from that cliff. And we say, well, I think what he meant was 5 miles.
But I'll be honest, I don't think people come to church thinking, let me bring God my best.
Well, again, I think this is all about the conversations that we're having, the expectation that we have when we're talking about church culture. We're not talking about the distinctions. We're talking about how Christians understand what it means to be a Christian. And this isn't a part of what our Christian conversation is about, what it means to be Christians.
I don't think really bringing my best is what is thought of. It's the opposite mentality of I need to give the tithe.
When we do talk about giving our best, it's all external. When you think about the sermons you've heard about bringing God your best, it's about wearing a suit, not wearing flip-flops, not having holes in your jeans, not wearing jeans, It's all external. Give God your best. That's why we have our Sunday best. And it's not about, hey, do you remember that woman who came into the service and put 2 pennies into the offering, dressed in rags? Best. Why? Because God looks in the heart, not on the outside. That was the best.
Mm.
It has nothing to do with whether or not we're wearing jeans or flip-flops. It has to do with whether we're coming to give God my all. And if I have been made a musician and I'm coming to give God my all, that means my all. It doesn't mean, well, I'm not going to do the solo because that might bring glory to me. If I'm doing it to bring glory to myself, God can deal with that, and He does. But it's not for me as the church to say, well, you better not bring that here because bringing your best means don't bring your best. Bring only what's not going to.
I think there is a underlying assumption when we talk about art in church, and that is that the believer is true or mature. And I don't assume either, depending on how loose the church is with those that are put up on the platform. I know
I
some
get that.
churches where really you just show up the week before, you start singing, and you're good to go. In other
Yeah,
churches,
I
again,
get that.
only members can sing. And membership requires salvation, baptism, and like there's an
Hmm.
actual process. So that is my one concern is that if if your church is loose, in regards as to who's up front and they're viewed as leaders, and pride is an issue, then that can become contagious, in my opinion,
I agree.
because you're dealing with a lot of individuals who haven't had the seasoning that it takes to actually even understand when God is correcting, as well as when He's, supportive slash encouraging.
I agree. But again, this is this is less a conversation about art as it is about
Correct.
what it means to be a Christian and how the church
Correct.
transmits Christian culture to the believer. Because we would not, to go back to the example of the kids playing soccer, we would not say because the kids are immature and don't have a good understanding of the game of soccer that we're going to not play. What we do is we let them go play, and then we take them aside and we teach them. And we let them go play and make a mess of it again. And we bring them aside and we teach them day after day, week after week, to move them from a place of being a group of hooligans chasing a ball to people who can win World Cups. That doesn't happen accidentally. It happens because there's a value on doing your best that is pursued and talked about and taught. And I don't think that we're doing that in the church the way that we see Christ. We see it especially in the Old Testament, but we
Mm.
also see it historically in the church. Again, when we rejected the Pope, we threw out the baby with the bathwater in this one. We said, no, this is about new covenant. God accepts everyone, so He must accept everything. No, He doesn't. Jesus made this clear. There's a new robe. My dad offered it to you. That was your price of admission. Put on my clothes. And you stood here and you said, my clothes are fine. These are the clothes God made me in. He'll accept me in these. And the master of the feast says, yeah, no, you're out, Jack. Get out of here with that noise. I expect you to do your best. And if I've given you better than that, doing your best means throwing off that old, even if it is what you brought to the table. Pride was the issue that stood in the way of that guy coming into the feast. It wasn't humility. It was his holding on to his own identification rather than saying, God has called me to be better. And the way I glorify Him is by receiving that and walking it out. I hope we've offended some people with this episode. I would love if you're offended by any of this, to write to us and share this with someone else. Stoke up your anger. I want to get some hate mail on this one.
Okay, well, is that where we're landing with hate mail?
You can send all hate mail to anchoredanddevoted@gmail.com.
The Bay Area Church, and I'm just kidding. That'd be hilarious. Yes, I'm having fun.
This is Pastor Jer and Pastor Joseph or Pastor Greg.
Wow. I think the big question for me and for everyone is: are you giving God your all on Sundays? Are you even thinking on Sundays about that or like that? Not just about what do I get or the 10% I want to give to stay in the bounds, but using and bringing your whole self to worship from the gifts you've been given and skills to be able to glorify God with all of yourself.
I'm going to step on your ending here for a second, Dave, because I think it really bears pointing out here. The people that God called to give their best to the temple did not start bringing their best to the temple when God called them. They had been bringing their best day in and day out for years.
Well, I was getting there. That our best should be seen in the community in ways that glorify God. If it's only on Sunday, but I encourage you to at least start there with that thinking. It should flow out into the community where your best is brought forward before God, not before others, but before God. So I think that's the challenge for us all today, is not to understand that, as we started earlier, this is church the people, not church the building. And so we need to engage in ways that glorify him. What else you got to say, Jer?
We love you guys. I love you, Dave.
Love you too, man. Love you too, brother. You all have a good one. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.